What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another review, and this time we're taking a look at Logan, the third entry into the solo Wolverine trilogy and overall 10th installment into the Fox X-Men film franchise. Let's waste no time. Let's get right into it. I love Logan. I've seen Logan multiple times now. I loved Logan when I first saw it in theaters. I loved Logan the second time I saw it in theaters. I've loved Logan the many times I've rewatched it on Blu-ray and DVD. I simply adore this movie. This is in my top 10 favorite superhero movies of all time. This is the greatest X-Men movie ever made. This outranks X2. It outranks Days of Futures Past. I have an admiration and adorance for the movie Logan. This movie does everything right, and to me it has very few flaws that they come across really as nitpicks, if anything. Logan, to me, is the perfect send-off of any superhero of any kind, and Hugh Jackman gives his absolute best performance as the broken down, weathered, aging, and dying Wolverine, Logan, who has to go on one last hurrah to save his genetically created daughter with Charles Xavier, who's also suffering from dementia. The movie takes a lot of inspiration from Mark Millar's Old Man Logan story arc, and James Mangold, who once again returns to the director's chair, adapts that story perfectly in my estimation. I mean, yes, it's a loose adaptation, but he took the best elements of Old Man Logan and applied it to the film Logan, while also adding the death of Logan as well. So many elements in this movie work for me that it's really hard to find any flaws. I mean, yeah, if I could find flaws, the villains could have been a little bit better, but it doesn't take away from the overall movie. So, with all that gushing out of the way, let's just talk about this thing real quick, and let's just get the positives out of the list, and let's just focus on everything. The cast in this movie is small, but it's absolutely sensational. As I mentioned, Hugh Jackman as Logan gives his absolute best performance in his swan song. I love seeing Logan as this broken down, weathered, beaten up man who is just begging for death at this point. When this movie starts, Logan is at his lowest lows. He is beat up from all the years of abuse he has to endure. He's reaching nearly 200 years old. The adamantium that's within him is giving him a lot of troubles, mainly because it's giving him poisoning. And we can see that the adamantium is finally taking that the adamantium that has been within him for decades is the thing that is finally killing him. And you can see he has everyday struggle. And I love it. Hugh Jackman's performance as just this bitter, grumpy Logan who is itching for death is absolutely fantastic. It's very, very poignant in a lot of scenes as well. In addition to Hugh Jackman playing Logan as the Grouch, we also get a lot of tender moments with this version of Logan. I love the scenes when for him aiding the ailing Charles Xavier, who is suffering from dementia. It's a beautiful callback to the father-son relationship that these two have shared throughout the entire X-Men franchise. And now, in a sense, both these men are dying. Like a dying son is pretty much has to care for his dying father in a way. Charles Xavier, he's slowly dying himself. He has dementia. His mind is rotting away. And that also creates a ticking time bomb because we all know that Xavier is one of the most powerful mutants in the X-Men universe. So now that his brain is suffering from a mental illness like a dementia or Alzheimer's, he cannot control it. And his brain is basically now a weapon of mass destruction. And now you have Logan, who has to care for this man, treat this man. Pretty much Logan has to do for Charles what Charles did for him. And the relationship is fantastic. Patrick Stewart and what was his final outing, of course, we all know he's in Multiverse of Madness, but in terms of the Fox continuity of X-Men films, this is Patrick Stewart's swan song as Professor X, Charles Xavier, and he gives an absolutely fantastic performance as the character as well. I love seeing Charles Xavier also as a broken man who is just, who's also reaching the end of his line. He has this mental illness that he can't control, and he has one of the most powerful minds in the universe, and now that this mind is rotting away. In addition to that, I also love the scenes I love the chemistry between Stewart and Jackman. These two get to really shine as basically co-leads of the piece. Their their constant bantering and bickering back and forth is that of a father and son, and it works so much and it works so well. Then you have the inclusion of Laura X-23, who is Logan's genetically engineered daughter, and you get this really cool family dynamic between the three of them that really works. And kudos to Daphne Keane. This little girl did a performance where she had basically no dialogue, and she didn't really talk to the third act of the movie. So yeah, Daphne Keane, she is a standout in this movie. She brought her A game. She was really, really good. Mainly because the bulk of her performance is just on physicality and facial expressions, and she pulled it off absolutely perfectly. I got zero complaints on Daphne Keane. If Daphne Keane as Laura didn't work, then the father-daughter relationship between her and Logan would have not have worked at all. And even the granddaughter-grandfather relationship that she develops with Charles, which is also very sweet and very poignant. And I like how it's actually Charles who is reaching out to Laura without anyone knowing about this. And that works. That's just great, too, as well. The movie also boasts a very strong supporting cast. You have Stephen Merchant, who plays Caliban, who's helping Logan aid Charles Xavier. I like Stephen Merchant as Caliban. He has a lot of funny quips in this movie, and I like the on-screen chemistry that he has with Hugh Jackman. That he has an on-screen Jackman. I thought they played off really well for one another in the scenes that they share. They come across as two guys who are just completely defeated and have been through shit within the last year. We also have Boyd Holbrook, who plays Donald Pierce, who is one of the villains of this movie. I like Boyd Holbrook. I like his performance in this movie as Donald Pierce. He ain't the most intimidating villain you'll ever see in an X-Men movie, but for the grounded context of this one, it works. The same thing with Dr. Xander Rice, played by Stephen E. Grant. If I have any complaint about the character of Dr. Rice, it should have been Mr. Sinister, to be honest with you, since this movie kind of piggybacks off the post-credit scene of Apocalypse, where the Essex Corporation are taking samples from the Weapon X facility, and it's pretty much those DNA samples are what created Laura. So yeah, I would have preferred that Richard E. Grant's character was Nathaniel Essex and not Xander Rice, but it is what it is. And what we got, I thought Richard E. Grant turned in a decent performance as the villain. I like the motivations of Xander Rice. I like how he has a connection to Logan through his father, who was involved in Weapon X and was killed. And this causes Xander Rice to create genetically modified foods that end up killing mutants. Because of the alterations that he did to them. So I know, it's kind of it's very devious on his part. I mean, yeah, it's also a little far-fetched as well. But like I said, for the grounded context of this movie, it works in a way. Like, it works. So I don't have that many complaints about it. We also have Elise Neal and Eric LaSalle, who play the Munsons, who are this family that Logan, Charles, and Laura run across into during their travels to Eden, which is where Logan has to take Laura, which is a safe haven. And we get the farmhouse scene in this movie. Now, unlike Avengers Age of Ultron, where that farmhouse scene is criticized, the farmhouse scene in this one, much, much different. This is a beautiful moment of levity scene. This is a scene where we actually get to see Logan, Charles, and Laura act normal and actually act like a real family. And pretty much, if Logan didn't have the brutal history that he had, the same thing with Magneto and the same thing with Professor X and Laura, then these three, you would have never thought they were fugitives on the run. They act like a real family, and it's such a poignant scene. And the way they act off the Munson family, you can really see the dynamics there, and it's a really nice tender scene. And it's one of those very few scenes in this movie where that gives you a couple of laughs, but not in the sense of it being jokey, but in the sense of it being warm and genuine. Especially for what happens afterwards when Xander Rice unleashes X-24, which is the dark half of Logan. Like, X-24 is Logan in just pure berserker rage mode and just a killing machine. And we get that we get the farmhouse slaughter with X-24. He kills Charles Xavier, and what is probably the most brutal death of Charles Xavier, more brutal than what Dark Phoenix did to him, mainly because he's being killed by his son in a sense. And I love the scene where Logan is telling a dying Charles, "It wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me." I love that stuff. That is perfectly good stuff. And just the X-24 rampage, where he slaughters the entire Munson family, is just brutal and horrific. Like this movie doesn't pull punches with his violence, and I appreciate that for it. Like the opening scene where Logan's taking on a bunch of gangbangers and he slices and dices them. That's great stuff. The scene where the Reavers attack Logan's compound and try to get Laura. That's great too. And Laura revealing that she's X-23 and is legitimately Logan's daughter because she has the adamantium claws and she slaughters everyone. That's brilliant. It's fun stuff too. And Daphne Keane looks like just such a little badass. Is such a little badass in that scene. She's really, like I said, I can't praise Daphne Keane enough as being a standout as X-23. She adds to the movie without taking away from the movie. Because this is a Logan movie first, but she plays an important role in it and has to have some scenes. And again, even the downtime scenes with Logan and Laura work for me, where Logan is just not willing to accept the fact that he has to help this little girl who is essentially his daughter, but he's forced to do it anyway. And after Charles and Laura, are hiding out in a casino, he finds out that Laura is going to a place that was made up in fictionalized version of the X-Men comic books. So basically this nurse who has been nurturing Laura and other mutants created by Xander Rice, like since the mutants were eradicated, Xander Rice ended up creating his own genetically modified mutants as these children. And of course these children could not be contained, and the nurses who were a part of it tried to save these children and help them escape the facility. And that's why the Ravagers are after Logan, Laura, and Professor X, because they want to find the mutants that had escaped. But yeah, and it's all because of this nurse named Gabriella, who's more or less the surrogate mother of Laura in a sense. So yeah, like the character of Gabriella, she's a minor character, and Elizabeth Rodriguez did the most with her screen time to make her an important character because she's pretty much the catalyst that brings the three together, that brings Laura, Professor X, and Logan together, and that embarks them on their journey to Eden, to this safe haven, to this place where they can go to with the other kids, so that way they don't got to be no longer genetically tested by these maniacs of Xander Rice and Donald Pierce. That stuff is really good as well. It gives this movie some stakes, but it gives them small scale stakes. But it gives Logan a chance to be a hero again. And this is what brings us to the third act of the film, where everything happens. They get to Eden, and the Ravagers track them. Of course, they were doing a lot of this because they had kidnapped Caliban, but Caliban was doing a thing where he was always making sure his friends were one step ahead and the Ravagers were one step behind. But let's finish it up. We get to the third act of the movie. Logan and Laura finally make it to Eden. This is, of course, Professor X has already been killed by X-24, and one of the most, heartbreaking scenes is just Logan not being able to accept this fact. And I love that scene. It's really well done. Hugh Jackman gives a great performance with the grief and the suffering and the rage that he just had to bury, essentially, his father because a clone of him killed him. It's great stuff. But yeah, we get to the third act, and Logan, he's apprehensive to help these kids, but eventually he discovers the X-Men side of him, the heroic side of him. He takes this serum that temporarily repairs his healing factor and builds up his stamina. He slaughters most of the Ravagers. And of course, the mutant kids, they kill off some of them as well too. And then this leads to the final battle with X-24, who nearly killed Logan in their first encounter. And in this one, X-24 basically kills Logan until X-24 is killed by the adamantium bullet that Logan has had on him since the beginning of the film by Laura. And this, of course, brings us to the most saddest, poignant, heartbreaking scene where basically Logan dies a hero. He dies in his daughter's arms, and he dies an X-Men. Logan's last act was as an X-Men, saving these mutant kids from being experimented on by these monsters and making sure they get to their sanctuary, their safe haven. To say that Logan is not a heavy movie is an understatement. This is probably one of the most heaviest superhero movies that I've seen in a long time. And I've seen a lot of superhero movies, and not all of them have the same resonance that Logan has had. 5 years later after its release, Logan to me, not only does it still hold up, it's still a goddamn fantastic movie. It's not just a good superhero movie, it's a great movie in general. It tells the story of a character that we'd have invested 17 years of time into, and he gets the story and payoff that his character deserves. He dies a hero and doesn't die a villain. His last act is to help his daughter and her friends find sanctuary, and he dies an X-Men. Fantastic ending to an awesome character. And in my estimation, the X-Men movies, this is pretty much the last X-Men movie. What came after this didn't hold a candle. I'm not including Deadpool 2 because I like Deadpool, and Deadpool's its own little separate universe. But Dark Phoenix and New Mutants, those movies are garbage compared to this. And those movies are just garbage in general. So yeah, there's clearly a lot more to cover with Logan, but those are just my overall thoughts on the film. Yeah, despite maybe some nitpicks with the villains not being overly memorable, but they serve a function for the story, and they work for what the story that Mango is trying to tell. The villains work, and I got no complaints with it. And so, without further ado, a 10 out of 10 for Logan. This is the perfect send-off and the perfect superhero movie. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Logan. Let me know yours in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.